Hello, everyone, and welcome to our introduction to social enterprise today. Thank you for joining us. This is part of our Integral Intros series where we present overviews of the area expertise that IntegralOrg provides from nonprofit financials, risk management, nonprofit governance, and of course, legal compliance. My name is Liz Tang. I use pronouns she, her, and I'm the program coordinator for IntegralOrg. I'll be around for hosting, monitoring the chat, tech support, and without further ado, we'll get into our land acknowledgement. Right, so we acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional ancestral territory of many peoples, presently subject to Treaty 6, 7, and 8, namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Métis people of Alberta. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside and work on today. I'm very happy to introduce today's facilitator, Yvonne Chenier. She is our officer and legal counsel of IntegralOrg, and she has 35 years of experience over that as our legal counsel too, and as a board member to many organizations, including nonprofit organizations and social enterprises.
Thank you very much, Liz, and welcome everyone. And I know many of you I know from previous webinars that we've done or live presentations that we used to do in the old days. And this is a very basic social enterprise webinar and discussion. We've done more advanced courses, and we will do more advanced courses if there's a demand, of course. But this is a very basic, like I'd call it social enterprise 101 for the issues that you would want to know about if you're considering the legal consequences or the income tax consequences of running a social enterprise. Of course, and some of the people who have been involved in social enterprise for a long time tell me there's a lot more to social enterprise than just the legal stuff. You know, there's the business plan, the conceptual planning, etc. But what we are focusing on and what I focus on in my area of expertise as a lawyer is the legal structure of the organizations that will carry on the good social enterprise work that will be done. So today we're going to do a quick overview. We only have an hour. A quick overview of the most common nonprofit statutes that you are all familiar with, and some of you are incorporated under. The Societies Act, the Companies Act, these are Alberta statutes, and the more modern, the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. We're going to talk about common CRA-related rules that charities have to be familiar with when they're considering running a social enterprise or doing any kind of commercial activities. And we're going to talk a little bit about social enterprise and the Income Tax Act in general for those potentially who are not registered charities. We're going to have some polls in our presentation. We're going to run a brief clip of our social enterprise toolkit. So we're going to cover all this in an hour, and we do appreciate your feedback as to what you would want in the future or what your specific questions are today arising out of things that I say. So let's start with what is a social enterprise. I think everyone has their preconceived notions of what it is, and that's why you came to this session, because you think you have some idea of what a social enterprise is. And there is no legal definition, I'll tell you that. There's a lot of writing in this area. There has been for about a decade now, maybe more. But we tend to use a social enterprise definition used by one department of the Government of Canada. It's a social enterprise is an innovative business model, whether not-for-profit or for-profit, that pursues a social, cultural, or environmental mission through the sale of goods and services, with the majority of net profits directed back to its mission. So that's one definition, and I think it encompasses sort of the concept of what we think we're doing when we talk about creating a social enterprise. We're doing good, we're doing some commercial business activity, and we're using the profits for our mission. So I'm only going to talk about nonprofits today. I mean, there are for-profit social enterprises, as I can list a few, and some of you may actually be familiar with them or working for some of them. But our nonprofit legislation that we would select in Alberta basically comes from three statutes. So let's talk about the first one that some of you may be incorporated under, and that's the Societies Act, which is probably the most familiar act to many people who start a nonprofit entity in Alberta. And a society under the Societies Act may be incorporated for any benevolent, philanthropic, charitable, provident, scientific, artistic, literary, social, educational, agricultural, sporting, or other useful purpose. So generally, it covers a lot of good organizations in Alberta. But in the Act, it does specifically say that it cannot be incorporated for the purpose of carrying on a trade or business. So often that's a potential stopper if you're thinking of creating a commercial social enterprise kind of activity inside an organization in Alberta. If you are looking at the Societies Act as an option, that may be a non-starter. I know that many of you are already incorporated under the Societies Act, and you look at, can we create a social enterprise inside our society, or incorporated society? And that's a bigger discussion that we have to have. But, it's not the end of the road if you are a society. I don't want to discourage any of you. The other statute in Alberta is the Companies Act. Yes, it's still around. The Companies Act used to be the old statute before 1982 that business corporations or businesses incorporated under exclusively. But now only nonprofits can incorporate under the society or the Companies Act. It's the Part 9 of the Companies Act, and anyone can create a nonprofit company under that legislation under Part 9 for the purpose of promoting art, science, religion, charity, or any other useful object. So that last part gives us a lot of latitude to create the kind of social enterprises that Albertans would come to expect inside an organization, because nothing in that statute prohibits Part 9 companies from engaging in commercial activities. As in any other nonprofit, the intention of companies, Part 9 companies, is to apply any profits or income of the company from any kind of business activity to promoting its objects. Keep that word in mind when I talk about social enterprise. Objects, purposes, things like that are very important. And of course, nobody can receive any dividends. So members of companies, or indeed members of societies, cannot receive any dividends from the profits of the company. Very quickly, the new modern legislation in Canada, the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. When I say modern, it's been around since it was a 2009 statute, where most organizations either had to continue into it or be incorporated into it since 2011. But nothing in that act prohibits engaging in commercial activities either. The only caution is no part of the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporation's property can be distributed to a member, a director, or officer of the corporation, except in furtherance of its activities or otherwise permitted by the Act. The Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act is a very comprehensive piece of legislation that governs nonprofit organizations that are incorporated under it, and it has a lot of good things in it to enable a social enterprise to be operated. So now that I've gone over all those three things, the big question is, what legislation is your nonprofit incorporated under, or the one that you're associated with, that you're thinking of as you attend the session today?
So sharing the results there.
Yeah, do share the results. Yes. So I'm glad I made the little point about don't worry if you're a society, okay? So I'm glad I probably allayed a lot of your concern. there's a few companies act out there, which is good. You know, the legislation is often used to create these kinds of social enterprises that maybe you're thinking of. I'm sorry that we only have a few Canada not-for-profit corporations, but the reason might be because there may be a little bit of an extra expense in that once you are incorporated under that federal act, if you are carrying on business in the province of Alberta, you need to register in the province of Alberta, which is an extra governance step, a little extra expense, and an annual filing as well. So I can understand that. If you're not a registered nonprofit, that means you're either maybe just an individual interested in the topic, or you are not incorporated at all and you're a group of people trying to do good without the benefit of a corporate umbrella to protect your liability. So that again is another topic we could be discussing in another session. You know, what do people do when they don't want to incorporate, but they want to get together to do good and create a social enterprise? And those of you who don't know, before you embark on any kind of planning to put together any structure that has anything to do with social enterprise, you'll need to find out. So that's good, but I'll talk generally about our Alberta societies and companies in the rest of my presentation, I think. Canada not-for-profit corporations, you share a lot of these same things, except your legislation is very helpful. It's very comprehensive. So I'll just move on. Stop sharing. I guess I just exit out. Okay, thank you. So the big thing is, if you are one of those organizations, a society, a part-time company, Canada Not-for-Profit Corporation, or even some of you that aren't incorporated, but you formed yourself into a group to do good, you could be a charity. You should, that's the first part we're going to talk about. I think when I looked at the list of registrants, I identified that most of you were actually registered charities as well. But again, this has a lot to do with social enterprise. So I need to know, and you need to know, what kind of designation Canada Revenue Agency gives you under the Income Tax Act as a registered charity, because there are four classifications of registered charities, and then there are other classifications that we will not talk about today that are other qualified donees. You might have heard that word before. So let's just gloss over a few things about private foundations, public foundations, charitable organizations, so you can think about which one you are identified as, because this is important for any kind of planning on social enterprise activities. So a private foundation designation is given by CRA under the Income Tax Act if 50% or more of the charity's directors, trustees, if it's a trust, or officers do not deal with each other at arm's length. Just think most of them are related to each other in some way. And potentially, CRA looks at where does the funding come from. If 50% of its funding comes from a person or a group that controls the charity, then CRA will give the entity the classification of a private foundation. Think of some of the big family foundations that you may be applying for funding from. Some of them might be private foundations, but you won't know until you actually look at the designation that CRA has given them. And where's that found? It's found on the CRA public website, where they show the designation of each registered charity. Then there are public foundations, and this public foundation designation is given to charities who are typically public, publicly contributing to society, as well as the public contributes to it. So generally, they give most of their money to other qualified donees, i.e. other registered charities and other similar entities. And the charity's directors, trustees, and officers are not related to each other. They all come from the public. Think of big public, like the community foundations. They're all public foundations. And generally, we all contribute to these public foundations. So the money is coming from various sources. So that's the public foundation designation. Then there's the charitable organization. and I like to refer to those kind of entities as roll up your sleeve and do the work organizations. Don't worry about where you get the money from. Just get it from wherever you can, and you're not really giving it to other charities. You're using it for your own purposes. So, IntegralOrg is a charitable organization. That's our designation under the Income Tax Act. It's given to charity who primarily carry out their own activities, and more than 50% of our directors, charity directors, trustees, or officers are not related to each other. And generally, charitable organization receives the majority of funding from arm's length sources. So you may see a similarity between private foundations and charitable organizations. They're more public organizations. And the major difference, of course, is charitable organizations primarily do their own thing, whereas public foundations generally give money to other charities or qualified donees. So assuming some of you who didn't know are probably checking the CRA website as we speak to see what your designation is. I'm going to ask you soon what your designation is, but what does this have to do with social enterprise? Well, it has a lot to do with social enterprise because the Income Tax Act prohibits private foundations from running any type of business. So we'll discuss in a minute what is considered a business by CRA. But public foundations and charitable organizations are permitted to operate related businesses inside their charity. So this is where, the social enterprise aspect of running a commercial activity, a social enterprise inside their organization comes in. So public foundations and charitable organizations are free to do that. And we'll talk about more specifics later. But in the meantime, I want to know who we're talking to. What type of registered charity are you? Are you a charitable organization? You roll up your sleeves and do the work. Are you a public foundation, great big community foundation, let's say, or some other public facing organization that gives most of its money out? Private foundation, small family held kind of thing. Or you're not a registered charity at all, which is interesting because that's 17% so far. Liz, you can share the poll, I think. 20% now are not registered charities. So you 20% basically can tune out the next 5 minutes or so of my presentation because I will be talking about registered charities and how they can do social enterprise under the Income Tax Act. Then we'll have a demo of our toolkit. And then at the end, I'm going to talk specifically about nonprofit organizations carrying on social enterprise that are not registered charities. Often we split this kind of presentation in two, but today we're combining them because it's a starter kind of presentation. So we've got, most of you are charitable organizations, which is, good, roll up the sleeve. No public foundations, private foundations, a few of you. So, this is where you have to think about the kind of commercial activities you might be carrying on in your private foundation. And the ones that are not a registered charity, as I said, will go later at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's go on to Canada Revenue Agency. What do they consider a business when they're looking at the social enterprise kind of activities? So generally, this is very general. A business involves commercial activity. So that's deriving revenue from providing goods or services. So you're selling something. You're selling something tangible, or you're selling something that is service related. And you do it because you want to earn a profit. You want to earn some money from this activity. So that's what a commercial activity generally is. And when CRA is looking at whether or not an organization is doing a commercial activity, they'll consider, what did you intend to do? What's your intended course of action with this commercial activity? Is there a potential to a profit here? And is there profits from previous years that show that it's a profitable activity? And the people that are doing it for you, or the personnel involved, are they the kind of experts that are qualified to run this kind of commercial activity? Meaning, did you hire these people specifically to do this, or is it part of their job? So this is generally, common sense, right? Business is, and the way we look at it is, it's profit driven, and it's selling something. So if a charity is a registered charity is doing a commercial activity, there are a few exceptions where CRA does not initially consider it to be a business, and we will talk about these just generally, and we could do a whole session on these specific exceptions for charities that run businesses. So obviously, soliciting donation is a commercial activity. You are intending to earn a profit. So CRA does not consider soliciting donations to be a commercial activity. Short-term fundraising, capital campaigns, that kind of thing, CRA does not consider that to be running a business. Selling donated goods. So if someone donates a whole bunch of stuff to your charity and you resell them to the public and get money and profit from that, CRA does not initially consider that to be a business. Then there's a whole thing on community economic development activities. CRA is currently fine tuning what they consider those to be. There might be a new guidance coming out on that soon. That's another specific exception to a commercial activity that they do not initially consider as a business. Investment activities, say you have a portfolio and you have some extra money and you need to invest it in the stock market, say, or in a portfolio using the prudent investor rule, then that would not in itself be considered running a business. And if this is one that usually catches most charitable organizations, the last one, if you charge fees for your charitable programs. So let's say we charged a fee for this session today. I know we didn't, but let's say we charged a fee for that. Would that be integral or carrying on a business? No, because this is a charitable program we're offering, our educational programs, and we're not charging a fee for that. But if we did, it would be part of our charitable program fees that we charge. So when the important thing about these exceptions is they're not initially considered to be carrying on a business, but if that is all your charity does, then that's when you reach the tipping point and things start looking a little different. So if all you do is fundraise all the time and ignore your charitable purposes and what you're supposed to be doing, then that is where the tipping point comes. So, and again, we could do a whole other session on all of those. But I will use one example, and that's one near and dear to my heart. And I know that there's people in the audience that are from this organization. So Women in Need Society is an organization in Alberta that is a social enterprise, and it is under one of these exemptions because it is selling donated goods. So people like me, donate our clothing and our furniture that we don't need anymore, and the truck comes and gets it, and then they sell it, or they give it away to the people who need it, of course. So that is an example of a social enterprise where it falls under the exceptions of the CRA prohibitions for charities to carry on commercial activities unless they're in one of the exceptions. So I'll say that just as a quick commercial for Women in Need Society. So the other big exception, and one that most of you should be falling under, I think, and what we try to, when we're creating an organization that says we need to find a revenue source from commercial activities to support our mission. So we make sure, if you want to retain your charitable status, we make sure that the type of commercial activity, the business that you're going to run inside your charity is actually a related business, because CRA, of course, feels that a related business is okay to run inside a registered charity without jeopardizing your charitable status. So they have this wonderful guidance, and it's very long, and our toolkit that you'll see in a minute goes over it quite substantially. What is a related business? Well, in CRA's view, it's a business that's either run substantially by volunteers or a business that's linked to your charity's purpose and it's subordinate to that purpose. And that's a way of saying it's got to be something that has to do with what you were given charitable status in the first place for, i.e. your purpose. And secondly, it has to be sort of a secondary to that main purpose of doing your charitable purpose. It's got to be something on the side, not something that is your main focus. And of course, we've already talked about who can do that. Charitable organizations and public foundations, not private foundations, can carry on this. So these are the kinds of things that if you are a charitable organization or a public foundation, you need to be very specific in your commercial activities, your social enterprise activities, that they are either run by volunteers or linked and subordinate to your purpose. Now, I didn't have the slide in here, but I often start here telling people, how do you know what your charitable purpose is? And I'll tell you right now that how you find out what your charitable purpose is you go to your incorporation documents as amended potentially, the ones that Canada Revenue Agency approved when they give you charitable status, because in that you'll find if you're a society or a Part 9 company, you will find the objects. In Alberta, we call them objects, for which your society or Part 9 company was incorporated. Very clearly stated in your, if you're a society, the application for society that you filed under the Societies Act, and if you're a Part 9 company, the memorandum of association that you filed to obtain incorporation as a Part 9 Alberta company. Potentially you've amended those over the years, and hopefully if you've amended those documents over the years, you've gone through the proper processes. And if you were a charity, before you amended, you actually got permission from CRA for those amended objects, which would be your amended charitable purposes. So that's a long-winded way of saying, before you even think about your related business activities, make sure you know what your charitable objects / purposes are, because everything has to be related to those to qualify for the related business exemption. So that's a very long-winded way of saying charities, go for it if it's related or if you fall under one of the exemptions. So to help you in this process, we created this toolkit. And the Social Enterprise Legal Structures Toolkit, freely available to anyone to use. We're going to run a quick demo of it right now, which is pre-recorded by the Christina Roberts, who created this Social Enterprise Legal Structure Toolkit when she was working for us doing this project.
Welcome to the demo of IntegralOrg's Social Enterprise Legal Structures Toolkit. I'll click Learn More to open up the toolkit, and here we are on the landing page. Before you start an assessment, you should have a business plan for the social enterprise you plan to embark on. For an established organization, you should have an understanding of which legislation your organization was incorporated under and whether you have charitable status. Since some users might not know this information, we included some guidance on how to find out here below, as well as some additional resources on the toolkit landing page. I'd like to walk you through an example of how an existing organization can use the toolkit to find legal and regulatory information that relates directly to a social enterprise activity that they are planning to integrate into their operations. We're going to use an example of a nonprofit organization incorporated under the Alberta Companies Act that does not have charitable status. This organization is a community association, and they are interested in operating a cafe within their facility to make it a more enjoyable place for community members and to support the cost of operations. So when you're ready to start an assessment, click this button, and we will get started. So our community association is located in Alberta, so I click yes to this question. The next question asks whether we have an existing legal structure or organization, and there's an information icon that we can click on that links to a tooltip explaining what we mean by organization in this context. And in this context, we know we do have an existing organization, so I'm clicking yes, and we would prefer to operate the cafe inside our existing structure. So I'm clicking yes to this question as well. Users should have a thorough understanding of their organization's stated objects or purposes in their incorporating documents and their mission, vision, values, and strategic priorities. So I will click yes to this question because we have all of these things for our community association. This question asks whether our organization is incorporated. And again, there's a definition of what we mean by incorporation, which helps us answer the question. So we know that our community association is in fact incorporated, and it's incorporated under the Companies Act. So we'll select that from the options here. We also know that our community association is not a registered charity, so we're answering no to this question. The next two questions are trying to get at whether we might need charitable status to get the startup capital necessary to start a social enterprise. We have a tooltip here explaining what charitable tax receipt means, and it's an acknowledgement that a donor will be entitled to a reduction in their income tax payment because of a gift given to a registered charity. In this case, we will say that the source of startup capital for the cafe is not demanding a tax receipt, so we're going to answer no to this question. The startup capital is also not coming from a source that only funds registered charities. In this case, the startup capital might be coming from a municipality or other government source, or the community association might have simply hosted a series of fundraising events to get enough money to start its cafe. So we're answering no to this question. And this next question is key. Do you anticipate that your social enterprise activity will consistently generate a significant surplus for the organization? There is a tooltip here that provides us with more information about what we mean by significant surplus. And this refers to excess income that accumulates an amount greater than the organization's reasonable needs to carry out its social purpose activities. In this case, the income brought in by the cafe is going to be part of the community association's overall operating budget, which will be balanced by the expenses it incurs to carry out its community purposes. So the cafe will not be operated for the purposes of generating a profit. So we can answer no. And nonprofits need to be careful here, because if the cafe were being started to generate excess income, it might jeopardize the nonprofit status under the Income Tax Act. And that's true regardless of what profits are used for. So we answer no, and that brings us to a result that discusses carrying on a business activity inside an established organization. So this is what a typical result looks like. It'll have an overview of the result and then several other drop-down items and accordions that provide further information. This result explains that there's nothing in the Companies Act that prohibits these entities from carrying on business activities. It goes on to discuss tax implications and explains that tax-exempt nonprofit organizations are generally permitted to carry on business activities that compete with taxable entities, as long as they're not operating with a profit purpose, either intentionally or unintentionally. So the conclusion is that we can start the social enterprise within our existing structure, so long as the business is directly connected to the nonprofit goals and activities, and any surplus earned is unanticipated. The result also contains some cautions about different risks, tolerances that the organization needs to be able to take on, and also some information about GST and some other regulatory considerations. So this brings us to the end of our example. You can complete an assessment as many times as you'd like, and your different versions will show up here. You can review your answers as well as your previous results. And you will be able to also share these by downloading a PDF or copying a shareable link. There are also case studies of successful social enterprises that are featured throughout the toolkit, though none happened to come up during our particular assessment. But if you wanted to see those, you can go down to resources and click the bottom link here, which will take you to a page that has a list of all the definitions used in the toolkit, as well as all the results and the case studies. And I will just open up an example of what a case study looks like, so you can get a sense of what those look like. And we encourage you to explore all of the different definitions and case studies for a rich learning experience. We hope that you find the toolkit helpful, and we welcome any feedback or questions you might have.
But let's talk briefly in just a few minutes about nonprofit organizations that are not registered charities, such as the community association that was demonstrated in the toolkit demo that we just saw. So in order to be exempted from having to pay tax as just a general plain Jane nonprofit organization, you have to fit into the little bullet in the Income Tax Act, Section 149, 1 sub L, that you have to be organized and operated exclusively for social welfare, civic improvement, pleasure, or recreation. And that covers our Societies Act, our Part 9 Companies Act, our Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act purposes that we have already gone over. But for all of these purposes, or for any other purpose except profit. So the word profit comes in. If you're a nonprofit organization, you cannot be operated for profit at all. CRA's position on commercial activities is stated right there. So generally, the carrying on of a trade or business is it's got to be directly attributable or connected with pursuing the nonprofit goals and activities of an association. It will not cause it to be considered to be operated for profit purposes, which is good. That's probably all of you that ticked off that you're a nonprofit organization, not a registered charity. This is exactly, it should be describing you. But what is a profit purpose? So what happens when a CRA looks at their definition and they're looking for a profit purpose in your nonprofit organization? So you cannot have in your purpose a stated or an unstated profit purpose. So your stated purpose would be the one found in your objects of your organization. So if your objects are to run a business, then you can pretty well know that you're not going to be allowed that exemption, because that's a business is a profitable enterprise. But an unstated profit purpose may be found by CRA when it looks like the organization is actually operated on a profit basis rather than a cost recovery basis. So if you're budgeting to have a profit every year, then it looks like you're a profitable organization, not a nonprofit organization. So excess income that accumulates year after year in an amount greater than your reasonable needs to carry out your nonprofit activities are an indication that you are carrying on business for a profit purpose as opposed to a nonprofit purpose. And the big one that people always ask about, the organization maintains unreasonable reserves. And what an unreasonable reserve is something that it can't be stated. Each individual organization has a different scenario as to what kind of reserve they would need. So that's what CRA would look at, your activities which you're carrying on in your nonprofit organization that's not a registered charity, to see if you are actually a for-profit. So the question is, and this is what you all came for, if you're a nonprofit organization, not a registered charity, can you still run a social enterprise? Well, you can, and as the toolkit demo indicated, you can, as long as it's connected with the nonprofit objectives of the organization, the one you stated in your incorporation document, similar to a charity, except CRA doesn't approve your nonprofit objectives. Generally, the government of Alberta in its statutes would talk about what a nonprofit objective is from the definitions I read off at the very beginning. And the income brought in by your social enterprise inside your nonprofit is accounted for as part of your cost recovery budget. So you're earning enough income to recover the costs in your organization. And if you do earn a surplus, it wasn't planned for. It was unanticipated. So that was the example in the cafe in the toolkit. And there are many other examples in the toolkit for nonprofit organizations that you might find similar to your situation that would be considered social enterprises. So this is a definitive word on what we see from CRA when they're talking about nonprofit organizations that are potentially carrying on actually profitable activities. The first 3 paragraphs there are generally what I've just spoken about, but the last one is the lawyer's way of saying it depends. CRA says, as always, it is a question of fact whether any organization is exempt from tax pursuant to paragraph 149 1L of the Income Tax Act. So that means it's not your decision if you're exempt from tax. it's CRA's decision whether it's exempt from tax, and you have to fit into their screen. Now, to be fair, Section 149(1)(l) is a very old section. To some people, it doesn't even make a lot of common sense in our environment today, where we're talking about social enterprise kind of activities. But it is what we have. And in 2009, CRA embarked upon a study of this section and how to treat nonprofit organizations under the Income Tax Act. The study was completed. They audited many organizations, but we have yet to see any change in the Income Tax Act arising out of that project. It was called the Risk Management Identification Project, if you want to look it up. So that is a very, very quick rundown of me trying to leave 10 minutes for questions and discussion on the basics of social enterprise, the legal structure. So what I've covered is I've covered the kinds of statutes you probably are incorporated under. We found out most of you are societies. Then we've talked about what kinds of registered charities can actually carry on social enterprise commercial activities inside their organization. And we've then covered some basic exceptions for those charities of the kinds of activities that CRA does not consider to be business activities if they're limited and not being the sole purpose of the organization generally. Then we've talked about the related business rules, which basically says if you're carrying on a commercial activity inside your registered charity, then it's got to be related specifically to your purposes for which you were incorporated and CRA approved for you when they gave you charitable status. And then we talked about nonprofit organizations that are not registered charities very quickly, and we looked at Section 149(1)(l) of the Income Tax Act, which basically says a nonprofit organization can carry on a commercial social enterprise as long as it's not a profitable one. Basically, that's to sum up that. So that's it in 50 minutes, and let's have some questions and talk about some more details that are important to you.
Great, thanks. We have one question. It is, can a registered charity incorporate a corporation as the related business/subsidiary in this context?
That's a very good question. And that's where we do a detailed next step social enterprise webinar. But generally, registered charities, and I'm only speaking to registered charities in this because that was the question, and that's very important. There is nothing to prohibit registered charities from owning shares in a business corporation that carries on an activity. So a common structure is if you want to run a profitable business and to generate revenue for your registered charity, and you don't want to do it inside your registered charity for many reasons. One, maybe it's not related to your charitable purposes. Two, maybe you don't want to confuse people or cloud the issues inside your registered charity. Another reason might be you might be taking a risk with this business venture, and you don't want to risk the assets of your registered charity. There are ways with very careful planning where a business corporation is incorporated. And who is the owner of the business corporation? Well, it is the charity. And then under the Income Tax Act, dividends can flow, funds can flow into the charity from the business corporation. So there are wonderful structures we create using business corporations, other kinds of structures where the charity is the beneficiary of the income from a separate business. And the key word is separate business. Okay, when you're incorporating that and the charity owns the business, that's all the charity does is own the business. It doesn't operate the business. It doesn't work the business. It doesn't meddle in the business. There's a wall. Okay, so that's a very, very specific kind of structure that has been used commonly. So it's possible, but it's got to be done right. So you don't jeopardize your charitable status.
All right, so this might be one of those like, come to us directly questions, but I'll read it out. So we are a nonprofit organization under Societies Act with the funding from the government of Alberta for parts of our operations. Our social enterprise activity directly relates to our purpose and generates income to support further operations. However, the CRA doesn't recognize our Societies Act number as an incorporated non-for-profit organization. So what should we do?
Sorry, you'll have to, that is very specific. And
Okay.
I find it hard to believe CRA doesn't recognize a number, but
I
oh,
directly
I'm
messaged that to you.
okay.
So.
Yeah, this is quite interesting, and there's always these little questions, and charities run into these regulatory walls. I know, and sometimes it causes a lot of problems. This is one of the things we do in our clinics, our free clinics at IntegralOrg. We look at problems that organizations are having, and we use all the resources we have at our disposal to help you solve those problems. So if you're incorporated under the Societies Act, I can tell you you have a corporate access number, an Alberta corporate access number, and that's an Alberta number, and any incorporated entity in Canada should have already, or certainly if they don't, they can apply for a business number with Canada Revenue Agency, and that's another number. That's your business number under the Income Tax Act. Because what CRA is looking for, if you're a registered charity, of course, you have a business number. You cannot not have a business number if you're a registered charity. But if you're a society that's not a registered charity, which I think this is exactly the situation here, then CRA is looking for a T2 corporate income tax return, as some of the accountants on the call, or the ones I have the pleasure of working with, always mention to incorporated societies. But every corporation in Canada can get a business number, and there's a way through CRA to get it. So I think that's what is happening with you. They're looking for you, and they can't find you in their system. So you have to apply, and you have to get your number. So then you get online with CRA, and you file, and away you go. You can apply for charitable status if you qualify. This is not a mystery to me what's happening to you. So I would encourage you in this case to apply to IntegralOrg and have a clinic with us. Easily
Great.
solved.
Yeah, and they just messaged me that they'll probably connect after this session.
Yeah,
So.
I think it's yeah, Alberta is provinces are separate from Canada. Okay, I talk about Canada. That's the Canadian government, and Alberta, Ontario, BC, we're all separate jurisdictions. And a lot of the issues that charities and nonprofits have is the jurisdictional issue, which only constitutional lawyers understand.
Great. We don't have any more questions, so
Okay.
we could probably just move on to.
I have one more question
Sure. Yeah.
from that's not been asked. Sometimes people say, well, can we have a nonprofit corporation, a nonprofit organization that's not a registered charity? And that is another option, but you have to be very careful in that, because you have to incorporate a nonprofit organization that is nonprofit. And if it's nonprofit, you have to say, how is that going to benefit our charity? So these are common mistakes that organizations do when they think about social enterprise. Let's just keep incorporating nonprofit organizations. And what you're doing is you're incorporating all these little section 149(1)(L) entities that can't make profit. So if you can't make a profit, it's hard to distribute anything to anyone that might benefit from it. So that's like a trap people sometimes get into when they're doing planning.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for your immense expertise, Yvonne. I'm sure we'll be doing this again sometime soon. If we could, sorry, if you could just screen share still, and we'll go through the last bit. No worries. Perfect.
I'm pressing the button.
Thank you. Yeah, it always takes a second.
This is the commercial part. Go ahead.
Yeah, we need some music to fill it in. Okay, yeah, so thank you everyone, and thanks for attending today. We hope you guys gathered some insight on this brief introduction to social enterprise. As I mentioned before, I'll be sending you guys the recording and the slides as well as our evaluation survey link once the recording is ready, which might be a couple days. But your feedback for our workshop directly influences our education. So thank you so much in advance if you do fill out that evaluation link. So we have done some other integral intros about financial and governance topics, and these recordings are accessible and will be accessible from the same page that you'll find the recording of today's session. So we'll do more intros in the fall, as well as more in-depth legal presentations in the fall as well. So keep an eye on that. If you want to sign up to our newsletter, that's the best way to hear about them first. If you were wondering though, where to go from here with your organization's social enterprise aspirations or problems, as we mentioned before, you might want to look towards our consultation services. And so these look like short conversations or 1-hour problem-solving sessions called clinics between one of our IntegralOrg experts, including Yvonne, and your team. So these consultations are free, and they're just part of our mission to educate and support Alberta nonprofits. So you can access that through our website by looking for the clinics on there. So you can contact using our website, or you can contact our main number or our email as well. So I thank you guys all for joining us, and we hope to see you guys all again.